All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining us on this panel, and I think this is a topic that people really have been looking forward to today, and that is the interaction between the need to provide power and the need of our country for data and advanced intelligence uses, and how that all may come together. And so, first, I think as we kick this off, I'd like to ask each of you to make a few remarks about your company, what you're hoping to accomplish here at the conference, and why you're here in Texas. So, Clayton?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, for having us and moderating the session. Clayton Scott, NuScale, so we're a small modular reactor company, the only certified technology in the U.S., scalable from 77 megawatts to 924 megawatts. And we're kind of unique on what we've been approved. So we've been approved not only from an overall technology scope, but the ability to be off the grid, the ability to be behind the meter, the only one that has an approved methodology by the NRC, which took 7 years to get. So it's very uniquely positioned to satisfy a lot of different markets around desalinization, data, et cetera. So Texas is an interesting environment because we can do the only technology that can do dry cooled. So air cooled. So there's a lot of benefits that we see that we can bring in the format of what Texas brings. The layout is, and obviously, we've been working with the PUC Commission on the advocacy policy papers that have been generated to Governor Abbott. So it's a business state, it's a good state, a lot of opportunity, and I think it's certainly a big focus for us, and I think we can bring a lot to the state in that respect, and as well as some of our supply chain is here.
Just as a follow-up, just for folks, and I knew what you meant, but maybe not everyone does. Just explain what you mean about air-cooled versus others.
Yeah, so we can cool our reactors using air-cooled fans rather than consuming a lot of water as doing a typical loop-through cool from a water source like a lake or a river or ocean, et cetera. So it allows us to put our reactors in a lot of different locations. We don't have to be dependent on water. We don't have a large consumption of water, so it's a big benefit in that respect. It's very, very unique.
Great. All right. Chris, to you.
Hi. Working? Hi, I'm Chris. I work for Google. We're an internet search company you might have heard of. Maybe not. But more seriously, we've recently expanded, obviously, into offering cloud services as well as a number of other video platforms and exchange of information. I think to address the elephant in the room, everyone knows we're a hyperscaler or one of the hyperscalers and have increasingly large load growth in order to meet not only, I would say, the AI growth, but an increasingly data-driven economy where people and industries are leveraging their data that they have and the data of the economy and trying to figure out how to optimize that usage. And that's resulted in the larger expansion and growth around data centers. Here in Texas, we have 2 facilities right now in South Dallas. We've announced over $1 billion of investment just this year in Texas. If you haven't noticed our tower downtown, we have a large presence here in Austin, as well as Houston and Dallas. So we're here to talk about nuclear because there's an appetite for it, but also because we think Texas is a great environment to generally do business in.
Brent?
Awesome. How do you follow the Google? No, I'm just kidding. I'm Brent Rampal. I'm the Senior Director of Nuclear and Power Strategy at Veriten. For those of you that don't know, Veriten is a strategy, investment, advice-focused company supporting clients from the traditional energy industries, manufacturing, industrials, basically the world of energy beyond the typical nuclear electricity world. And those folks are asking a lot of questions about nuclear right now, and I'm really excited to be supporting our clients and our partners as we dive more deeply into the subject. Why I'm here in Texas today is because our offices are in Texas, up just around the corner here in Houston. So if you're ever in Houston, please come and visit Veriten. But in addition, we just find the nuclear opportunity and the space to be both fraught with challenges and opportunities, and we are really, really focused on helping these a-traditional companies move into nuclear opportunities. For example, Liberty Energy, who many might be recognizing more in the news. When Chris Wright and Liberty were pursuing an investment in Oklo, we were very happy to be reached out, because Liberty's a client of ours, to do the due diligence on that investment for them, because it's hard for an oil and gas company to due diligence a nuclear investment. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities for companies like ours, companies like Liberty, and nuclear companies to work together in the future, and we're here for it.
Great. Clayton, it strikes me you have a design with individual units, 50, 77, depending upon the design, that can scale up. Can you talk a little bit about how your system works in that regard, how you might do that over a period of time, and how that may be particularly advantageous for the Texas energy market and some of the data center approaches that we've been discussing?
Sure. So as you said, so we can take each module is 77 megawatts. We can scale up to 12 modules per reactor building. So we can build a plant and we can scale it as needed. Now, the conversations we're having today with the hyperscale companies are everybody wants multiple gigs, so that scalable is a little bit different, right? But you certainly can add. The uniqueness that I think about it is each module has its own individual turbine. So it's a skid-mounted turbine, it's easily to maintain, but it allows that scalability, which is important because as you refuel one module, you still have 11 modules operating, so you're always at a 92% capacity factor, which is very appealing for the tech companies, for the hyperscalers, because of the availability requirements and having to be, 5.9 availability and reliability. So it allows us to do that. In Texas, when you have a very strong renewable market, having individual modules and the fact that we can really move those from a load following perspective allows us to fit into the existing grid environment to manipulate and manage that load movement. So that's one benefit. But the other aspect is being able to add as you construct. If you're starting at a smaller scale and you want to increase, you can do so. But the other thing is just having the flexibility to manage your offtake, because you've got multiple turbines, so you have a very flexible offtake where you can have some modules dedicated, for example, to process steam, or you can have others dedicated to electricity. So we think it gives us a tremendous amount of flexibility, certainly in this market in Texas.
Chris, you talked a little bit about the investment that Google has made here in Texas, both with people and down the road with data centers. A lot of discussion this morning. Jimmy Glotfelty laying out the plan that the governor of Texas has laid out. Obviously, the panel that we just heard from, significant support in the state legislature. How does that? I presume that is encouraging for the kind of things you're thinking about here in Texas. But can you talk a little bit about where you see Google's plan, to the extent you can share it, going forward here in Texas over the coming years?
So, trying to figure out what I can and can't say.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. You're I know it's difficult when you have so much in play.
It is, in part because these data center investments are large dollars, and once you've selected a site for one, the transmission that goes into that and the resource sourcing that goes into it, the investment isn't just in the data center itself, but it's also in the energy grid that we need for it. Google has a policy of focusing on additionality, so we try and match all of our resources to the load that we are consuming. For example, we currently generate much more than we consume. In Texas, we have about 2,800 megawatts of contracted capacity, which is well in excess of what we use at this moment. So without directly answering your question, I can say, Texas is a bright spot in our outlook. It has a lot of potential. The ERCOT system is very easy to interconnect resources into. I think policymakers are proactively working with us, and we are trying to proactively work with them on how to address energy issues in the state footprint, both from a sustainability perspective that includes water, but also just a supply perspective that brings on generation. You
did a great job of navigating that particular minefield. Brent, obviously you and I have known each other for a while. You've had a depth of experience working in industry. You've worked for CAT, Clean Air Task Force. Now, of course, with Veriten. So you've seen the industry from a variety of perspectives. And I think my question here is really going sort of at a 20,000-foot level. How do you see the Texas market moving forward? We saw, obviously a lot of interest in, large generation, microreactors, everything else in between. What's your sense of how this is going to play out over the course of the next several years?
Sure, and we'd be remiss to also not mention that I worked for NuScale too at a certain point right now.
Yes.
So I think that a lot of what Texas brings to the equation and the discussion here is the Texas companies, the organizations here, the quote-unquote traditional energy companies that have learned already through the last couple of decades of pain and suffering that they suffered through, the lessons that a lot of us are hoping this industry will not be learning right now or will be able to learn from others around. We have pointed for years around needing owners, aggregators, project management, construction experience, all of that stuff. And in certain sort of equations now here in Texas, like I hate to give a plug for one of our partners and clients at Veriten, the NOV Shepherd folks, but folks with experience in construction and manufacturing and willing to own and operate the assets is something 4 or 5 years ago when I was at Clean Air Task Force that Armin and I would have, banged our head, we would have begged for that sort of present to be falling in our lap. So the fact that that can happen intrinsically and, naturally in Texas because companies like NOV and their customers spend their own money without federal or state support to investigate and dive into the opportunity and recognize and find that that is worthwhile and want to now move forward. And so those companies and those engagements can only mean, is the only pathway for the future of nuclear, and Texas is a place where that can actually happen right now.
Let me open a question to all of you, and maybe just to give you a heads up, Chris, I'm gonna let you take the first crack on this one. Obviously, there are high aspirations for deployment of nuclear in support of data centers and other technologies, both here in Texas and other parts of the United States. How much of that activity do you think is fostered by concerns about climate change? And how does nuclear compare in the long term with renewables and natural gas in meeting the needs that you all are going to have in this area?
I guess I'll take the hint. So Google has a 24/7 CFE policy. I would say that by and large, there are strong motivations as a result of climate change and amongst corporates to reduce their carbon footprints, which has partly driven to nuclear, but what has really then exacerbated that is the increased electrification across all industrial sectors. Data centers are a popular target for the increasing demand on the grid, but the fact of the matter is we are not the only load that is growing on the grid. Every load, which we didn't see coming in 2017, every load is growing on the grid. Oil and gas is electrifying, industrial processes are electrifying, the residential sector is moving towards electricity with heating, and so more of the drive for nuclear, I truly believe, has been by the sheer scale of energy that has also been involved in addition to its reduced carbon footprint.
Just to jump on that and highlight the oil and gas part of that discussion. If you haven't seen it and it's unfamiliar to you, there is a great study that S&P Global and ERCOT did last year called Electrifying the Permian Basin, where S&P and ERCOT looked at 34 basins in Texas and New Mexico and oil-producing regions, applied the greatest electricity grid growth additions we've ever seen in American history year over year, applied conservative assumptions around production and extraction, and then applied oil and gas companies' commitments for electrification, and found there would be 8 gigawatts of unserved load in just these basins in 2032. So either this load is real, either these commitments are real, or something else is going on here right now.
Clayton?
Yeah, Jeff, I think it's, I think the carbon aspects and the green aspects of nuclear are important, but it's also becoming an energy security issue that we're noticing. And when you look at that, that's almost starting to drive the importance of bringing in nuclear as much as the climate aspects. The other part, when you look at it, at how it sits in the renewable scheme, if you actually do firming and you firm everybody up to 24/7 baseload power, actually nuclear ends up being one of the most economical sources. So, you got to do an apple-to-apple comparison, and I think that's been part of the problem historically. Is we've always looked at things independently and not really levelized it across the field. But when you look at that, it really makes this a competitive market.
Well, I completely agree with that, particularly when you look at time levelization, where you're comparing a 20-year asset to an 80-year asset, and that makes a big difference. Obviously, it's an upfront hint for nuclear, but in the long term, really is cost effective.
Yeah,
I think one thing I'd add to the dialogue here is, and I think obviously we've got a new administration coming in that may have a little bit of a different view on these issues than the one that's going out. But some things don't change, and that is things are still the way they are in Europe. I think of one of the companies you're all talking to, Chris, Nucor, right? America's largest steel company, all electric arc furnaces. They need to meet certain green steel requirements for exports to Europe, which says you got to get that carbon out of there. So, there are those attributes that can be really helpful for our export in other markets as well. Let me ask a sort of going into that. We have had what is, I think, a transformational election over the last several weeks, and admittedly, and I think this was pointed out this morning, nuclear has benefited from bipartisanship dating back significant investments made under the Obama administration. If you were briefing President Trump or an incoming DOE secretary, what kind of recommendations would you be making about nuclear energy, about some of the uses that might depend on nuclear energy, and how they may want to shape their policies going forward? Brent, I'll let you take the first crack on this one.
So I think I'm in a unique situation, having spent 5 years at doing policy advocacy. And when I started in 2017, going to the Hill with ClearPath and Third Way, when there were just 3 or 4 of these organizations that were really committed to doing this, we were talking about tens of millions of dollars in support and a little bit of NRC reform that would hopefully be transformative down the line. And 5 years later, when I was leaving Clean Air Task Force, we were talking about billions of dollars in demonstration support, neutral tax credits, technology neutral tax credits, and a lot of support and a lot of opportunity to continue at that level. So I guess my advice to Trump and to Chris, who I know I think is very thoughtful in this space, is mostly just around, hey, the government has done a lot and is trying to do a lot here. You may not need to necessarily do so much more, and it may not even be possible in this political environment for you to do so much more, but certainly backtracking at all would be a failing right now. And the successes and the trends that we have seen over the last 5 to 7 years would be would be detrimental to the industry to step back from, even if we can't continue an exponential growth beyond that.
Yeah, Clint, I'm going to go to you next, but you are reminding me. I got invited to sit on a panel this was during the Obama administration, and they were outlining a variety of things that they were going to do, and they were celebrating the fact that they put $5 million together to start the GAIN initiative.
Right.
And I was not a good panelist. I basically said this is chump change,
Right.
effectively. But we got to the right place, and you're right. It's a huge amount of progress that's been made. And one note, and again, I'll get this to you in a second. I mean, I said a little about this morning. The sea change in Washington, D.C. over the last 20 years on nuclear has been astronomical, and we got a lot of different people here who represent a number of pro-nuclear NGOs. Man, I wish we'd had that a long time ago, but it's great that we have it now.
So, before Clayton, I just want to say, Armand here earlier with Isabel talking about that MIT Diablo Canyon report we wrote all those years ago and everything. I never thought that man would ever speak publicly about that report ever. I wasn't allowed to put my name on it. We weren't allowed to say anything about Clean Air Task Force association with that because we were so concerned about the political implications of NGOs supporting this work and trying to drive into state policy and everything. To see that change just 5 years later, when I begged this man to let me put my name on a paper I wrote, and he told me, no, sir, is like that in and of itself is a microcosm of where we've
Well,
come.
things have changed.
Right, things have changed.
So yes, you can advertise your authorship of that report now. Yes. Okay. Clayton?
So as he says, drill baby drill, I would tell him build baby build. So without that, all kidding aside, what's important is he's got to figure out how to get the permitting expedited. The permitting really is the challenge on the front end of these builds. And the second part, I think, which is important, is figuring out how to get an insurance for project overage run on first of a kind. Not necessarily for every build. I don't think that makes sense. But on first of a kind builds, at least put in some type of comfort zone to give people the incentive to want to be first, because right now that's holding a lot back.
Chris?
The clean energy transition has happened through multiple different administrations at this point. So I think both of the panelists with me have accurately described it. Don't go back, especially for nuclear and the investments that we want to make there. But similarly, build, baby, build, in the sense of commercial buyers are looking for assurances if you want us to invest in this technology and sign deals, similar to what we have done with Kairos. That requires some long-term signals from the federal government that things will just stay the same. I will say we would love some reform on the permitting process, so that way we can work more flexibly to bring those technologies to market and to what the secretary said earlier, focus less on projects and more on a product.
Yeah, and I think I speak to a lot of people in D.C. I think there is a lot of support for the notion that more work needs to be done on permitting. The NRC, my former agency, I think has done a lot on the licensing of the technologies. They made movement. They learned a lot from what they did to NuScale. But I think actually the early site permitting and a lot of the issues with NEPA and all that are going to be an interesting discussion coming up. Let me Chris, let me turn back to you. I mean, we sort of launched into alluding to some of the things that you all are doing relative to data centers. I think it's one of those black boxes of which a lot of people really don't understand how they work. As Google is developing its strategies for potentially seeking nuclear generation, can you talk a little bit about the factors that go into the decision of where you might think about employing those, perhaps a diversity of different, it's not all one size fits all. You might want to have a range of sizes. And how much does that, data centers, I take it, aren't one size fits all either. Can you talk a little bit about how that shakes out and what we may see in that market?
Yeah, so some of what I want to make sure we frame with people is the idea that this load wouldn't exist, or that data center style load wouldn't exist, isn't true. We're just the Costco for all of those networks that industrial companies, or those mainframes that all those industrial companies had prior to the big data center boom. Now what has happened is we offer basically an efficiency, right? We can offer greater computational power at greater efficiency and higher concentration. A Costco or a Sam's of data storage. The AI boom that has come with it is basically an advanced way to process your own data to achieve results or to find information out and to form strategies, which is part of why it's a national security discussion. It's why you see it becoming increasingly embedded in healthcare. It's that it can take complex data sets, massive complex data sets, and form reasonable conclusions. It is only as good as the data that's put into it, so when you get questionable things from Gemini, I don't know the engineer, I'm sorry. But where this is going in the future, we are learning as well. There is increasing flexibility on location. It used to be purely dictated by the latency required from the customers at hand. As we pivot towards a more machine learning environment, we can locate a little further away in more fiber-constrained environments, which opens up new energy opportunities. But some of the other fact of the matter is it is now an energy-based decision. Data center hyperscalers are interconnecting where they can get to the grid and energy the fastest. That's not to say that we don't provide our own reliability to those sites either, right? There is backup generation on these sites. They support the mainframes. If there are emergency events, we do respond to those and we'll start that generation. It's just constrained by EPA permitting, and it's diesel-style generation, so it's not ideal to be running in the long term.
But I want to get to so in terms of can you just sort of lay out for a little bit in the data center facilities that you guys are putting in, what's the size ranges of power that you might need for some of those down the line, you think?
I think our largest site is probably going to be somewhere in the range of a gig, but where they start at in their initial ramp is much lower. It can be anywhere from 50 to 200 on that initial ramp. But they're scalable. So where this ends in some degree is where does our hunger for data end, and how are we going to manage that? A specific site has all kinds of contingencies to where it gets produced at, but yeah. So
effectively, you'll have a range of sizes, but they could go anywhere from 50 to 200 to 1,000.
Yeah, and as this is a relatively new industry in some ways. Like data centers themselves, not particularly innovative or new, but the scaling of them and the AI applications, this is within the last 2 to 3 years, and so right now there's just a lot more demand than there is supply of data center computational power out there. So it's growing rapidly to meet that demand, but it will level off like every other mature industry. We're like in the 3-year point.
Yeah. Brent, let me. You made a comment that I think was helpful. You talked about the huge, what you're seeing for huge demand growth in various of these basins in this region. Can you talk in a little bit more detail how that may get applied in upstream oil production? Obviously, that's very important to this state, to this region. What are some of the opportunities there, and how does that align with some of the technologies that are being developed in the micro arena as well?
Well, so I think I think that what we saw maybe 3-4 years ago with like the Project Pele announcements and other things going on allowed a lot of oil and gas operators and producers to kind of tilt their head and be like, oh, that sounds like a diesel generator replacement to me. And many of us know in this room that the DoD can do a lot of things to soldiers in terms of shielding and irradiation that we can't do in commercial operations, and that's probably not a direct diesel replacement in commercial operations. And so the issue here is not thinking about how their operations are now. The issue is thinking about how their operations could change and what could be offered by large amounts of scalable electricity, deployable, distributed basis in these basins for these operations. I am not an oil and gas expert. There's, many of them in this room. The NLV Shepherd guys are standing right over there. Go grab them later. But, when I saw my first photos that my partners and clients sent us of what some of these sites look like, I didn't know you could stack that many diesel generators on top of each other. And it looks ridiculous, the amount of wiring and cabling and the things that goes on at these sites. So there are needs for power, for compression, for all sorts of different operations. And when you start to say, hey, the electricity is much more available and scalable and deployable quickly, they start talking about doing a lot of things more differently. Like right now, perhaps you may not co-locate production and extraction as quickly as you would if you had more electricity and other resources available. You may have to rely on transmission now as you're doing things. Well, you may do your business differently if you don't have to do that. So I don't think it's so important to think or realize what they do right now. The importance is to realize that they use a lot of energy, and they are going to continue to use more energy, and they have been really good at finding ways to use that energy, and they will always find ways to use the energy.
All right, Clayton, I'm going to give you the last question. You talked a little bit earlier about national security. Obviously, here in Texas, they had a couple of very difficult storms that they had to weather that really challenged the grid at a time of year and did cause a number of deaths at certain times. You've got a design. Well, I guess it's two questions come out of this. Number one, how does nuclear play a role in ensuring greater reliability of the grid? And two, I think you all may have thought about, I think you've got a black start capability. You'll be able to restart the reactor if it's shut down. Can you talk just briefly about those attributes that would be helpful for Texas?
Sure. I think nuclear obviously is far more robust in a lot of ways, but I think unique to our design is because of the fact that we have multiple modules. It gives us a very unique situation. As I said earlier, we never really shut down. When I was at San Onofre years and years and years ago, during an outage, we had a situation where the turbine generator couldn't get a part. And we couldn't get the part for 18 months. And we were shut down for 18 months. And that was a significant impact, not only financially, but to obviously our base that we were supporting. So being in this situation where we can actually come in and provide up to 1 gigawatt of power, knowing that we're never really going to be in a situation to shut down, I think is a big plus. Now, being able to black start, we're certified to not have to be on the grid. We can start up our plant. We can take one module to start up an entire unit and get everything back up and running. So it's a very unique design when you take a single modular design compared to a multiple modular design. It gives us a whole lot different flexibility, which I think is an attractive element.
Great. All right, well, folks, thank you very much for contributing to this, and please join me in thanking them for this panel.